Good morning, welcome to Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. Guest in the studio, Dr. Jeremy Webster. This is one of those shows where it may mess with your mind a little bit, because what we're going to do is the show is twofold today. We're talking about vitamin E, the dangers of, or supposed dangers of vitamin E from the latest studies. We're talking about beta carotene. When you think of carrots, you think of beta carotene, and the dangers of that. And then we're also going to discuss in the second half of the show meal frequency and how it supposedly does not affect thermic expenditure of food, which is to say, if a personal trainer or anything you've seen on TV or anybody who's ever told you or anything you've ever read that suggested eating smaller meals throughout the entire day will increase your metabolic rate or make you burn more calories, the latest study suggests that it won't happen. And that comes from the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition. So again, today's show is twofold. First one is to make you understand the truth behind these studies. We don't want people being afraid of vitamin E. We don't want people being afraid of taking beta carotene. And we also want you to recognize how a study is designed and what may be left out and what should be introduced, and also what the constraints of a study are.
Absolutely. And George, the bottom line here, which I hate to bottom line at the beginning of the show, but a headline and something that's sensational is what drives sales of newspapers and blogs and online papers. The truth is very boring typically. Yeah,
but do these universities really need to come out with a study that is either inconclusive or not true and spend millions of dollars on it? And is the motivation to do that just to say, okay, now we need more money to do a further study? Is that the motivation?
Well, there's a lot of potential motivations. Sometimes drug companies design a study that's guaranteed to fail when they look at something like a vitamin or a nutrient.
Yeah, because it's not something they're making.
Exactly.
Idiots.
And if they can show that something is dangerous or ineffective by making a faulty study, the headline sometimes is enough that people will stop using something natural, and they think by default they have to go to a medication.
All right. So let's talk about, coming up next, what we'll do is we'll discuss the supposed dangers of vitamin E. Did you know, by the Johns Hopkins University study, they found people who took half of the recommended current maximum dose of vitamin E had an increased risk of death. Beta carotene. Did you know that people who consumed daily amounts of beta carotene had a 17% higher rate of lung cancer? We're going to leave you with that, and we'll
according to certain studies.
According to certain studies, and we'll talk about it. We want you to understand the studies today. So that's the two goals: understand the studies and understand why these studies may be faulty. Coming up next with Dr. Webster, 704 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. 712 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. Guest in the studio is Dr. Jeremy Webster. Let me write something real fast before I forget it, because it's so pertinent to this show. Today we're talking about studies that are performed, and I guess, Dr. Webster, what we can do is also talk about a study that's done on anything or anyone. It doesn't matter. We're going to teach you today about studies and how they're performed. With that, we're also going to give you some takeaway information about some of the latest studies that you may have read that seem to be counterintuitive and also kind of goes against the things that we've talked about for years on the radio. And that is the first one, the dangers of vitamin E. Johns Hopkins University found that people who took half of the recommended current maximum dose of vitamin E had an increased risk of death. I'm going to go even further. 2011, researchers say that vitamin supplements may increase the risk of death. And let's see, an international team of researchers from Copenhagen University Hospital examined published data, so they didn't do this on their own, published data, that's like Johns Hopkins and others that Dr. Webster will reference, on beta-carotene, vitamin E, vitamin A, and vitamin E. They said that they claimed that these supplements could cause oxidative stress and damage and kill cells. The message is, we should not put something in our mouths until we know it works. Here's what they found. After researched information. This is not their information.
Right,
this international...
It's a meta-analysis is what it is.
Meta-analysis?
Reviewing other people's studies, trying to put them all together to kind of average out the studies, so to speak.
Well, the problem with that is it doesn't really give you the answer.
No,
you're averaging the studies, but you're not part of the study.
Right.
Okay, so here's what they found. They found that there was a significant increase in risk of death for people taking vitamins. So now they've done something wrong to everyone who's ever taken a vitamin. They've done them an injustice. Because they're saying, what they're essentially saying is, food kills, don't eat it.
Right.
You idiot.
Right.
Okay. They said alone or in combination, vitamins are dangerous. They said vitamin A had an increased risk of mortality risk. I said that twice, risk, but there it is, by 16%. Vitamin E increased the risk by 4% and beta-carotene by 7%.
And I'm going to surprise you right here. I'm going to say, in a certain sense, they're actually correct.
You're not surprising me because I agree 100% with the study. Because there's something that's left out that will make it wrong. So go ahead and go forward.
Well, the same goes with every study. Studies can be designed, first of all, studies can be designed to get almost any result that you want. But that doesn't mean that the study is false.
Right.
Sometimes it means that the conclusion is not really valid. Sometimes it means, or most of the time it means that the headline, the big headline that you see on the front page of the newspaper is not valid.
Wouldn't you say that the conclusion is often valid for the study that was performed?
Well, yes and no. Sometimes the conclusion is far too broad. They draw far too broad of a conclusion. So you have to dig, and when you start reading the real details of the study, you'll find that the conclusion they came up with was much too broad, and maybe when they say vitamin E increased risk of death, maybe that was their conclusion, but what you really find in the study is something much more finite and limited, and not such a broad thing that says, does that mean all vitamin E is bad? Does that mean vitamin E increases risk for everybody?
But hold on, Dr. Webster. People don't know to ask, don't always know that there's a difference in vitamin E. So they're not going to know that to ask that question, is all vitamin E bad? If you don't know what you don't know what to ask. So therefore you take the study for face value.
Right, and that's one of the problems with looking at just the conclusions and taking the conclusions at face value. They're oftentimes far too broad.
Right.
They don't tell the full truth. They might be telling the truth, but not telling the full truth. And the full truth is much more valid than just taking bits and pieces. Look at how people, look at how the Republicans and Democrats fight in politics. Oftentimes they don't lie, but they just tell half the truth. And it makes
you just lied by saying
terrible.
Oftentimes they don't lie. I mean, there's that.
Well, sometimes they do lie, but sometimes they're telling the truth, but they're only telling half the truth, which makes the other side look terrible, versus telling the full truth, which would make the other side not look so bad.
In addition to that, what they're doing, just like lawyers do, and they're supposed to do, they're doing their job, is they're selling you, and you believe them. Until the next person comes along and they sell you and you believe them. That's what's great about this show. We're going to let's go ahead and get into the meat of this.
You want to talk about vitamin E now?
Well, no, not vitamin E. Let's still can talk about the studies, but let's talk about what people should look for in the study, because it doesn't have to be vitamin E. It's any study. What should they look for when they're looking at a study?
Well, let me give a quick example. I don't know if people are going to want to dig through the studies to the level that I do, but let me give you a quick example that will kind of open your eyes. Let's say you do a study and you test two different populations, 1,000 people each, and you've really done your research or really done your homework to make sure that the two populations are pretty much as identical as they can possibly be. You do a good study. You find in one group you get 2 deaths out of 1,000, and the other group you get 3 deaths out of 1,000. Both of them, the difference between 3 out of 1,000 and 2 out of 1,000 is 1/1000th, or 1/10 of 1%, right?
Right.
You know, some studies look at information like that, and when they do the statistics, they say there's a 50% increase in death rate in one group versus the other
Well, it's
group.
because they're doing George DeJohn math.
Right, but it's legitimate math. But it depends how you look at statistics, and depends what you're wanting to get out of the statistics can sometimes determine whether the result looks very small, i.e. one group had 0.1% greater death risk, which most people would consider insignificant, or you can make a headline that says 50% death risk in this. And it's true. 3 is 50% more than 2.
Right.
But there's a difference between absolute statistics versus a different type. I'm sorry, the wording lost. I lost the wording. The different type of statistics that can be used, and oftentimes what drug companies do is they report the benefits in the way that makes it look very big, like the 2 to 3 being 50% greater, and then they report their side effects in the other type of statistics, which makes them look very, very minimal. If they did the same type of statistics, no one would use those drugs.
Okay.
So that's one way.
Now, but you're saying drugs. It could be, we're talking about a study, just
Yes, but
looking at a study. They should be double-blind,
Any type of
placebo studies.
Of course, any type. You can even have a good.
Should a study have a
designed-
certain amount of people? Because we know that some studies that only have 10 people are really not telling us a whole lot.
Yeah, good example. Let's take the general population of men as an average. What would you say? 150-pound would be an average bench press over a population, maybe?
I guess.
You guess.
I don't know.
What if they took a statistical analysis and they just used me and you? They just went in this room. Oh, you two. Let's see what you can bench press.
Right.
What would our average be? 300, 400, whatever.
Right.
It'd be way different. So this population study wouldn't be any good to get an average between certain groups. The bigger you go, the more likely you're going to get an average. And you can look at this value. It's called the p-value, and that'll tell you. That'll basically say if it's like a p.01, that's going to say you have a 1 in 10,000 chance that your study isn't valid. It's basically how much of a percentage, based on the large,
Is that
the
on
large
every
population.
study?
You can find that on every study. Any valid study will have that particular value listed in there.
So then, what's a bad number for people to see? Because I didn't know about that.
Larger, the worse.
What's the largest one you've ever seen?
I off the top of my head, I don't know. Look, I've looked at a lot of studies, George. I don't know what the largest one I've ever seen is. If you get one that's like 0.05 or 0.01 would be good. Really small numbers, much smaller than 1 is good.
So smaller than 1 is good. If we
Yes.
start seeing 1.0,
Oh yeah, that wouldn't be good. Much smaller than what 0.05 or 0.01. Those are reliable
versus
studies.
0.10.
Yeah,
Yes, that's what I'm
that's
saying.
getting worse. Yeah,
Okay.
0.5 would be really bad.
Where is this on the study? At the very bottom of the study? Is it at the top? Where do people find? I want to know, because I want to see when I start looking at these studies now. I want to see if it's something worth my time to read. Because if it's a 0.10 or 0.15, as far as I'm concerned, I won't even look at the study. I'll go somewhere else and look.
Right. Sometimes you'll find it in the abstract. Sometimes you'll find it in the conclusion. Sometimes you'll find it in the big meat of the document.
Okay.
Sorry.
Vitamin E, no, don't worry about it. This is what we're trying to teach people, and I'm trying to learn from it as well, because I've not read as many studies as you. Let's get into Johns Hopkins University talking about what their finds are if you have vitamin E and a certain amount of vitamin E, that there's an increased risk of death. Is the study valid?
Yes, for what they tested.
Right, and this is important for people to recognize. I would say the same thing for everything we're going to talk about today. Yes, for what they've tested. Because, before we go further, because I know where you're going, which foods are vitamin E found in?
Well, vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it's found in foods that are fatty. First of all, they're always fatty foods. So things that are like nuts and seeds. It seems like the vegetable fatty foods, like the nuts and seeds, tend to have a lot of vitamin E in them. Mm-hmm. So that's the yolks tend to have some vitamin E in them. So
well, hold on a second. Nuts and seeds and eggs are really, really bad for us. I mean, don't you remember that study that came out with a 0.17,000 value on it that said that these things are killing us every single day?
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
study.
no kidding, because it's not true.
Right.
It's people need to recognize when you eat food, food heals. Food doesn't kill. If you have an allergy to it, it can increase a risk of inflammation as well, and that can lead to things down the road if you're allergic to a certain food. So before we go further, it's important.
The vitamins and minerals and nutrients from food don't kill.
I know that. That's my point.
Yeah.
They don't kill. We know that they're good for us. That's why I was making fun of a study I just made up. They don't kill. We know they're good for us. How in the world can Johns Hopkins, which is supposed to be a reputable university creating these great studies, say that vitamin E is bad for us. What did they test?
Well, they specifically didn't test vitamin E in food. They specifically tested vitamin E supplementation. And they specifically tested synthetic vitamin E.
You know it's synthetic.
Yes. All you have to do is look at the precursor when they list the actual type of vitamin E. Vitamin E, you can have tocopherols, you can have tocotrienols. Those are the two basic types. There's a whole bunch of different subsets within each of those. But then at the first of it, it says either D or L or DL, alpha tocopherol, for example. So when you look and you see the DL, for example, or the L, that's synthetic. If it says D, alpha tocopherol, that's at least the natural form of that particular isolated vitamin E.
So what Dr. Webster's saying is if you look at your vitamin supplement now, you're at home, you've got your multivitamin, you've got your vitamin E. If you see DL or L in front of tocopherol, throw it out, because you will be one of these people that's part of this study, most likely. John Hopkins saying that you have an increased risk of death. You do. We agree with them, Johns Hopkins. However, we're not talking about food. If you also wake up and have 6 or 7 almonds and you have some walnuts and you're having some eggs, that's actually good for you.
Right. And further, taking the natural form of vitamin E is going to be different than taking the synthetic form of vitamin E.
Yeah, because I take vitamin E every day.
Anytime you take a synthetic form of a nutrient, your body doesn't quite know how to deal with it. It takes other nutrients to process that synthetic form and convert it into the natural form that your body knows how to use. So you're depleting your body of other nutrients, which could be protective for things like cancer and heart disease. So that's one reason why you're actually driving yourself into poor health by taking synthetic nutrients.
Coming up next, we got to hit it.
Sure.
So coming up next, what we'll do is let's finish vitamin E.
Yeah.
Let's get into beta carotene. Not a whole heck of a lot of that, but because what I teased during the week is something that's so very important, especially when I did it on Facebook, talking about meal frequencies. Okay, you and I have discussed vitamin E before. That's why I tried to take a different angle with it today. You know, we've done it on several shows. People already know this information. This is more for the new listener. Beta carotene, we've not done so much of, so we'll do some of that. And then meal frequency, we've got to get the whole show in today, so stay with us. We'll talk about beta carotene and also meal frequency, supposedly not increasing thermic effect of food, expending more calories basically by having smaller meals. 726, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. 732, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket, George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. Guest in the studio, Dr. Jeremy Webster. We're talking about studies today that are not really valid. They might be valid for the research that they found, but they're not necessarily valid in our everyday life. We discussed some information about vitamin E and the study talking about if you take half the maximum dose of vitamin E every single day, you increase your risk of death. And we see a lot of truth in that because most people are taking the cheapest supplements they can buy. They're not bioavailable supplements. If you're not taking a supplement that's derived directly from food, it's most likely not good for you. So when you read these studies, take them with a grain of salt, but also recognize that there's
some truth to it.
There's some truth to it.
There's something we can get out of every one of these studies.
Right. So finish up vitamin E if there's anything else for us to discuss.
If you don't mind, why don't we just go to beta carotene? Because what I want to do with vitamin E, we can do beta carotene and vitamin E at the end. I want to conclude both of them at the same time. Let's look at the beta carotene studies, if you don't mind. There's some studies out there that have been pretty prominent showing that beta carotene actually increases death risk of and increases lung cancer by 17%.
That's significant.
And some studies, some headlines just say that, and that's really incomplete. The other headlines that you'll see is increases lung cancer in smokers by 17% if you take beta carotene and smoke cigarettes at the same time, which a lot of people think that beta carotene is an antioxidant. That should be protective, right? It should protect you. Even if you smoke, you should have less. If you take beta carotene and smoke, you should have less cancer than somebody that smokes and doesn't take beta carotene.
Less incidence of disease.
Right.
Yeah.
And I really looked deep into this particular issue because that's always confused me. And I thought maybe just because they're taking one isolated thing, that there's an explanation. I want to get to that. But I looked deeper into this, and what I found was the people who designed that study and came up with those conclusions went back and looked further at the details, and I looked at the details. And what I found was it wasn't as broad as even that. It was only people who had cancer, were under radiation treatment, and continued to smoke while they were while they were under radiation.
So you know what? I'm surprised the mortality risk wasn't even much higher than 17%.
Well, it was 17% higher than the people who didn't take the beta carotene.
Okay.
So this is completely, and they looked at everything else and they said, well, any other person who takes beta carotene has no increased risk of lung cancer.
So then why even do the study? Like I said in the very beginning of the show, this irks the crap out of me. This makes people think when they read these studies. And here's the biggest part. People that are listening right now might say, well, George, I don't go around reading studies. It doesn't matter. Guess what? You do, and you don't know it.
Yeah.
If you pick up Cosmo, you pick up Women's Health and Fitness, you pick up any health and fitness magazine, they're talking about these studies and taking excerpts of the studies. They'll put the headline, they'll talk about the conclusion of the study, and that's the end of it. And they'll do a whole bunch of these on one page. And you think now, without reading the study in its entirety, that vitamin E or beta carotene is bad for you.
Right. It's all about sensationalism, George. If they put beta carotene antioxidant increases death risk on the front page or
right.
on the cover of the magazine like you're talking about, that sells copies. If they put beta carotene increases death risk in people taking radiation and smoking concurrently, nobody cares, right? Because that's almost nobody, and my God, of course you're in bad shape if you're doing that anyway.
Right.
Nobody cares about that. But the bottom line here is, George, the saddest part is that they actually produced these headlines and they published these headlines, and it probably prevented people from taking nutrients or even eating carrots and things like that have good nutrients and bioflavonoids in them, such as beta carotene, because they thought that it was dangerous for them.
Yeah.
That's what's sad.
Let's get to the meat of the show, or something we're in the meat of it. Something I promoted during the week. I promoted it on Facebook. I promoted it on the radio. And this study comes from the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition. Several studies within this study are what are confusing. I'm not going to get into what all of that means, but there were different ages and different activity levels, and so there were several studies within this study. Let's just say this.
A meta-analysis again. What we're looking at is another meta-analysis, which is a study of a bunch of studies.
Okay, let's also say this. When someone asks for a study to be performed, it can cost millions upon millions of dollars.
Yes.
So regardless of what the study is, unless you see the same conclusive results from several different reputable journals with the right, whether it's a supplement or a medication or I don't care what it is, lifestyle change, unless it's something that is not really synthetic, it's going to be kind of hard to believe. And then some. You've got to get into the depth of it. This study said, in one part of the study anyway, they discussed obese, sedentary people who didn't lose weight when they broke up their meals into smaller meals throughout the day, 10 meals a day, so really small meals. And you say, well, hold on. Then that proves the study says if they didn't lose weight, then breaking up the small meals versus having one large meal is the same. No, because what you didn't realize in the study is they didn't change the amount of calories they ate.
Right, and the key to what you just said was versus the other way.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they didn't lose weight even. They actually did lose weight, but they lost weight. But they didn't lose more weight doing 10 meals a day rather than 1 meal a day.
I saw here what I said. It said it didn't change the amount of calories. They didn't lose weight. So the study I'm looking at in front of me doesn't say that. Regardless,
because there's a lot of studies within this one study.
Well, you know what, and that's true. They looked at women ages 40 to 75, then they looked at men and women between what was it 30 to 80, something like that. It was several different studies, like you said, a meta study. They also looked at those who just had the same sedentary obese lifestyle, that one large meal per day. There was a negative to it. Talk about the negative. The lipids.
Okay, well, the negative was, well, regarding the lipids, that's actually a positive, George. What they found in here was that they're admitting that the people who eat just one large meal a day, which they're calling gorging, had an increased elevation of their blood lipids.
Well, but it says also fat storage of cholesterol.
Yeah. Lipids in general. Lipids in general were increased when people gorge. Meaning, okay, if you're going to eat 1,000 calories a day and you have one meal that's 1,000 calories a day and you don't eat anything else, your blood lipids go up more than somebody who eats 1,000 calories, which 100 calories at a time.
Right.
So the lipids went up more, became what we can generally consider worse by just gorging. So that's one thing that kind of points in our favor, actually, showing that there is problems with gorging versus breaking your meals.
Well, that's what I said. The one negative is having one meal a day will increase fat storage, cholesterol, and issues like that.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I hear what you're saying also. You put a different twist on it. I don't want to confuse anybody. Increased meal frequency, this is their conclusion. Increased meal frequency does not appear to significantly enhance diet-induced thermogenesis, total energy expenditure, or resting metabolic rate. Now, get into some more of the meat about the study, because I'll bring that up again later.
Okay, first of all, I think there was 19 or more studies done. I know there was at least 19 that they analyzed. All of them were designed differently by different people. All of them had different conclusions. It's only when you take the overall. And George, what I see when you take overall of a bunch of different studies that are designed differently, different subsets of people,
yes,
different statistical analysis, when you do something like this and you just kind of average the whole thing, you almost always get no difference. That's what usually happens. You know why? Because some of those studies are designed specifically to look at certain things, and they come up with positive results.
Right.
There are very good studies in here that show conclusively that eating more meals a day versus less meals a day, as long as you maintain the calorie count the same, the people who ate more meals lost more fat.
Now, but before you go further, someone may argue and say, hold on, you just said they had more meals provided that they had less calories. Well, isn't that considered a diet? And if you just have less calories anyway, you'll lose fat?
Yes, but the same number of calories is
right,
what I'm saying. That they had the same number of calories whether they ate 10 meals or one meal. Same total calories per day. And the studies that are well done, are well designed, actually show that, yes, you do get a thermogenic effect from eating more meals. Some of the studies do. Some of the studies were designed differently, and they came up with the opposite. So when you average all these together, you don't come up with anything. But it's not really a valid study to do.
No, it's absolutely not. One of the things they said that increasing meal frequency throughout the day did, that it appeared to decrease hunger and improve appetite control. I tend to disagree with that, because when you have many meals throughout the day, especially when you're eating clean, clean is not having the foods that don't serve you. When you're eating clean, you tend to be, your clock goes off at 2 hours, 2.5 hours. You're starving. You're ready to eat.
Yeah, but you're able to eat, though.
You're able to eat, but my point is, it doesn't decrease hunger. What decreases hunger is having dense nutrients in a food and having protein. We know protein, of all the macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrate is the one that keeps you satiated the longest.
Right. Think about it this way, though, George. If what they're saying is, I think what they're saying is true, because if you are allowed to eat 10 times a day, you're not really going to have that much hunger. Sure, you're going to be ready to eat, but it'll be time to eat. So you are able to keep your cravings less than if you ate one big meal a day and then were completely not allowed to eat the rest of the day. I think you would find that late at night or sometime in the day, you would be completely starving and have a lot worse cravings. So I actually agree with what they're saying there.
They said people who had a restrictive diet were still hungry regardless of meal frequency. And I'll say...
that's the next point.
Yeah, go ahead and make your point and I'll go.
Well, one of the studies I looked at, they said they didn't note any difference between fat loss, lean muscle loss, or overall body weight loss in the two groups that ate one large meal of 700 calories a day versus multiple meals totaling 700 calories a day. Well, 700 calories a day. Have you ever suggested 700 calories a day for anyone?
Not even a kid.
That's the first thing. The other thing, it said lean mass loss.
Yeah.
They're losing muscle on this. And I've never recommended anything to my patients. I know you've never recommended anything to anybody out there to lose lean muscle. I don't care what the scale says. Let's not lose lean muscle, because that's not good for you overall in the long run.
Yeah, but women say, Dr. Webster, George, hold on. I just want to be smaller. I don't care what the hell I lose. I want to be smaller. I don't care if I lose muscle, because I don't want to be big and bulky. I know I'm taking the extreme here, but training over 1,000 people, I've heard it all.
Of course.
I've heard it all. Women, when they think of muscle, they think of big and bulky. They don't want to be big and bulky. They don't recognize that that's what's going to make you stop being so flabby, like the Queen Elizabeth wave when she keeps her elbow down at her side and she just uses her hand. Because she would have that tricep flapping back and forth and be like a flag in the wind.
Well, if you want to see what muscle looks like versus fat, look at Tina, the trainer that comes in here. She's tiny. She looks so tiny, but she's got a ton of muscle on her.
Yeah.
Because muscle is really small. A pound of muscle is really small. A pound of fat
is fluffy
and big. If you want to be big, add fat. If you want to be small, add muscle.
Right, and you know, listen to what Dr. Webster said. A pound of muscle and a pound of fat don't weigh any differently. They weigh exactly the same, but they look a heck of a lot different. If you saw Tina Burnett, who's calling next with the fitness tip of the week, she's 44 years old, and her body is ridiculous. She's got probably the best body on the planet.
Right.
I mean, she's amazing. However, if you look at her, if you asked her how much she weighed, I don't think even the guys in the circus could tell, you know, those guys who guess your weight, could tell her weight.
From a distance, she looks like the tiniest person you've ever seen.
She wears probably a size 0 in clothes or 2, yet she weighs a lot more than you think she weighs. And she doesn't look like a bodybuilder. She still has the feminine look to her. So people need to get a clue. Get more lean muscle mass and always be as strong as you can possibly be. Not as big as you can be, as strong as you can be. And that's another show. We'll talk about that another time. Coming up next, speaking of the hottie body, Tina's going to call in with the fitness tip of the week, and I'll give the conclusion of this meal frequency examination or meta study about what they say, and Dr. Webster and I will tell you the truth behind meal frequency. 746 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. Dr. Webster and I are going to do the conclusion on the conclusion of the study of meal frequency. Does meal frequency increase thermic effect? Go ahead.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, we'll talk about your whole conclusion and I'll do mine.
Okay, first of all, you look at certain studies that look at exactly what we need to look at. They do show that there's an increase in thermogenic
His mic's
effect.
not on.
Oh, put his mouth. Okay, now he's on. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yeah, if you look at the studies that are designed to look at what we want to look at, it does show that you get a thermogenic effect. Second thing is, by eating more meals a day, you have more stable blood sugar. Long term, all the things that these studies didn't look at are the things that affect you long term. Many of these studies were done very, very short term. Some of them like 2-week studies to look at weight loss. I don't care about 2 weeks. Do you?
You don't stimulate much in 2 weeks.
It's nice. I mean, it's nice to lose some weight in 2 weeks, but I care about what people look like 6 months, a year, and even 5 years from now. I want people to eat right and do the right things so that they have consistent weight loss, and then they can maintain that proper weight. They don't look at duration of the study. They don't look at insulin resistance. George, if you are eating one huge meal a day, your blood sugar goes on these huge swings, and you become insulin resistant.
Even 2 meals.
By that. Yeah, if you don't eat plenty of meals, eating more small meals keeps your blood sugar regulated.
And they did not look at that.
Of course not, because your insulin resistance is not going to affect weight loss over 2 or 3 or 4 weeks in these short duration studies that they looked at. It's going to affect you long term. And
it also affect cholesterol.
And that's the lipids that we looked at.
Yeah.
It was conclusive about that. Even this study, when it did the meta-analysis, said, yeah, lipids are obviously spiked when you eat one big meal versus small meals. When you have big sugar and insulin swings, always cortisol swings go along with it. So you're going to burn out your adrenal glands, which is going to affect your metabolism long term.
Sleep, metabolism, crave sugar, all those nasty things. Mood swings.
And with that comes neurotransmitter imbalances. Serotonin and dopamine get flushed out of your system. You get depression, and when you flush out all of your serotonin due to that high cortisol level, you start getting sugar cravings. So there you go. It's this spiraling thing that's working on itself. Now you're back to more insulin resistance, more sugar cravings, more cortisol, on and on and on and on. It never looks at leptins. When you eat one big meal, leptins is what tells your brain to control your hunger. Over 2 or 3 weeks, it's not going to be a big deal because most people have the willpower to force themselves to eat one way or another over 2 or 3 weeks during a study like this. Long term, it's not going to work. Your stomach is going to start to expand. Mm-hmm. Your leptins aren't going to signal your brain that you're full, and you're going to start eating bigger and bigger meals if you start eating this one meal at a time.
So a question somebody had, will having smaller meals throughout the day shrink my stomach?
Yes.
Right. Of course it will. Not only that, well, you'll be satiated even on meals that aren't as dense in nutrients. So let me just read this real fast. This comes from the study. The conclusion from the study. This lets you know, you don't have to be smart to figure this out, that it is not accurate and meal frequency does make a difference. The studies examined the relationship between meal frequency and body composition, which is body fat, may be attributed to underreporting food intake, especially in overweight or obese individuals. Let me tell you something. If you're 20 pounds overweight, you're overweight. Well, how did I want to say that? If you have 20 pounds to lose, you're overweight. A lot of people look at themselves and they want to put a towel around them when it comes beach time, or they want to hide it with a sarong, or, you know, just let it all hang out, whatever. You're overweight.
Sure.
Hiding it doesn't do anything but draw your eye to it. They say the various ages of participants wasn't looked at enough, and whether or not exercise was accounted for. How the heck can you do a study without that?
A weight loss study?
Oh my God. They said, however, when energy intake is limited, increased meal frequency may likely decrease hunger, decrease nitrogen loss, improve lipid oxidation, and improve blood markers such as total LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol, not bad, but considered bad, and insulin, as well as lower blood pressure.
That's good enough for me.
Yes, it is.
I would say if you can positively affect those things by eating more meals,
right,
then long term, you're going to have better weight loss.
Not only that,
better weight management.
Not only that, look, you can have these studies that are designed any freaking way you want, but when you get people who are in the trenches, personal trainers like I was, Tina, and others that recommend meal frequencies and been doing it for years, and bodybuilders have been doing for years, and you know it works.
Yeah.
I don't care what the study says.
Right.
It's wrong.
Their whole diet programs
Millions of people.
based on nothing but that is just eat exactly what you're eating, except for add one more meal a day.
Yeah.
And people start to lose weight just
Right.
by doing that simply alone.
Yeah. So it's the studies give me a headache, but we did the show because we want people to recognize when you see these little blurbs, these little excerpts in magazines that you read or in newspapers that you read, if you've not seen the entire study, and like Dr. Webster said, conclusions are always so broad, they're not the end-all be-all, then take it with a grain of salt and do the research, or email me or email Dr. Webster and we'll point you in the right direction.
Don't believe the headlines.
It's just to capture your attention. They do a good job of it. Okay.